Wyoming Territory, June 1882. The church bells tolled noon when Winona Sullivan shoved open the oak doors and ran. The wind caught her veil as it slipped from her pinned hair, dragging it down the wooden steps behind her like the ghost of a life she could not live. Her white satin skirt tangled around her boots as she stumbled into the dusty street of Buffalo, Wyoming, lungs heaving, heart pounding louder than the bells. Gasps echoed from the crowd gathered outside the church, but she did not look back. She could not. Not at the preacher. Not at her father. And especially not at the man standing at the front of that altar, James Foley, banker's son, cold as the silver coins he counted for a living. Winona's feet hit the edge of Main Street and she turned blindly toward the open land. There was nothing but dirt, sagebrush, and sky. The mountains to the west stood still, watching. She kept running. 2 blocks out of town, her legs gave up. She collapsed beside a split rail fence, gripping the fabric at her chest like she could tear out the panic still clawing at her ribs. She did not cry until she heard the hoofbeats. A single horse, slow and steady, came up the road behind her. She wiped her face, tried to pull herself together, but she could not stop the tears falling now, hot and fast. The rider pulled up beside her, boots hitting the ground with a soft thud. His voice was low and careful. "You all right, miss?" She turned her face away, but he did not leave. "I saw you come flying out of that church. Figured you might need a minute." Winona looked up. He was tall, lean under a worn canvas coat. His hat shadowed most of his face, but his eyes were clear and steady blue like winter sky. Dust covered his boots, and his horse looked like it had seen too many trails. This man had been on the move for a long time. "I am not all right," she said, voice cracking. "But I am not going back." He nodded once. "Seems fair." She stared, waiting for questions. For the lecture. For the judgment. But he only stood there, reins loose in his hand, like he had nowhere else to be. "I do not know what I am doing," she whispered. "Most folks don't," he said. "But you sure knew what you weren't doing. That takes guts." She let out a shaky breath and looked down at her hands. The gloves were white lace, now caked with mud. "What is your name?" she asked. "Harlan Grady," he said, tipping his hat. "And I reckon you're the bride who left a crowd full of people staring at empty pews." "Winona Sullivan." "Well, Winona Sullivan," he said, voice softer now. "You want to get up out of the dirt? I got coffee in my saddlebag. Lukewarm, but better than tears." She blinked. Then, against all reason, she laughed, wet and shaky, but real. He offered her his hand. She hesitated, then took it. His grip was warm and steady. He helped her up like she was not some runaway bride but someone worth picking up. Winona brushed off her skirt, tore the veil from her hair, and let it drop into the dirt. They sat under the cottonwoods just beyond the fence. Harlan poured her coffee from a dented tin flask. It was bitter, but it steadied her. "Where were you headed?" she asked. "Nowhere in particular. Just passing through." "You stopped for me," she said. He shrugged. "You looked like someone who needed it." She watched him carefully. His face was sun-worn, his jaw rough with stubble. He looked like he had seen too much and said too little. But there was kindness in the way he poured her coffee, in the way he did not ask why she had run. "I was supposed to marry James Foley," she said. "But I could not do it. He does not love me, and I do not trust him." "Then you did the right thing. My father will think I shamed the family." Harlan's jaw tightened. "Your life is not his to spend." She looked down, unsure how to respond. Then she whispered, "I do not know where to go now." He drank the last of his coffee, eyes on the horizon. "Well," he said slowly, "I was heading west. Just drifting. If you want to ride a while, I got space on the saddle." Winona's breath caught. "You would let me come with you?" "You ran from something bad," he said. "Maybe you ought to run towards something better." She swallowed hard. "I do not know you." "No, ma'am. But I reckon you will." The wind stirred the cottonwood leaves above them. She looked toward town. She could see the steeple still, far off. Voices would be searching. But no one was coming for her. Not really. She turned back to Harlan. "I need to change out of this gown." He stood. "You can use the barn yonder. I'll keep watch." She hesitated again, then nodded. She left the lace and satin behind in the barn, changed into her work dress from under the gown. When she came out, Harlan was brushing down his horse. He looked up. "You ready?" She took a deep breath. "Yes." He helped her up behind him, careful and quiet. She wrapped her arms around his waist. When the horse began to move, the rhythm of the ride grounded her. The wind caught her hair. The road stretched wide before them. They rode west. She did not know what tomorrow held, but today, for the first time in months, she felt like she could breathe. And that cowboy kind, quiet, steady had stopped her tears. She tightened her arms around him just a little more. By the time dusk settled across the land, they'd left the town's edges behind. The trail wound through low ridges and cottonwood groves, and the sky burned with the last of the sun's fire. Harlan slowed the horse near a shallow creek, its banks soft with grass and scattered stones. He dismounted first, tying the reins to a scrubby tree limb. Winona slid down after him, her legs unsteady from the ride. She didn't speak right away. The quiet between them wasn't strained, it had weight, but not burden. She stepped toward the water and knelt, scooping a handful to her face. It was cold and clean, and it helped. Behind her, Harlan gathered dry sticks. He worked with practiced ease, arranging them in a small circle of stones. Flint sparked, and soon a fire took hold, its glow flickering against the growing dark. "You hungry?" he asked. "I could eat," she said, brushing her damp hands on her skirt. He opened his saddlebag and pulled out a cloth bundle. Inside were strips of smoked venison, a heel of bread, and a small tin of salt. He handed her a portion without comment, crouching beside the fire as he ate his share. They ate in silence until the food was gone. The fire popped softly. A few stars began to show through the purple sky overhead. "I've never slept outside before," Winona said, her voice quieter now. "Storm'll hold off." "Sky's too clear," he said. "And I'll keep watch if that eases your mind." She looked across the flames at him. "Why are you alone?" He didn't answer at first. He took off his hat, ran a hand through his hair, then set the hat beside him. "I was married once," he said. Her name was Ruth. She passed 3 years ago. Fever took her fast. Winona's breath caught. She didn't offer pity, he didn't ask for it, but she let her gaze rest steady on him. "I'm sorry," she said. He gave a short nod. "I left Missouri after. Couldn't stay. Every place I turned, I saw her." She didn't press further. The fire shifted, the wind lifting the smoke eastward. "I never wanted to marry James," she said then. "But I kept saying yes when I meant no. My mother passed 2 winters ago. After that, my father, he stopped listening. Just decided what was best." Harlan looked at her, his eyes reflective in the firelight. "You said no today. That counts for something." She drew her knees up, wrapping her arms around them. "It doesn't feel brave yet. It will." A coyote howled faint in the distance. The night had settled full now, pressing close with its cool breath. Winona shifted closer to the fire and sat with her chin on her knees. He stood and moved to his bedroll, unfolding it beside the fire. Then he laid down a second one, farther off. "You take that one," he said. "I'll keep the fire up. You get some rest." She hesitated, then nodded and walked to the other bedroll. It smelled faintly of cedar and dust. She lay down, pulling the blanket tight around her shoulders. The fire's warmth touched her face. "Why did you stop for me?" she asked, eyes still open. He poked at the fire with a stick, watching the embers shift. "Because I know what it's like to lose something and not have anyone notice." Winona didn't reply. Her eyes closed slowly, her body easing into the blanket. The wind carried the scent of pine and distant sage. When she woke hours later, the fire was lower but still alive. Harlan sat nearby, rifle across his lap, gazing into the dark like he belonged to it. His profile was calm, and for the first time since she'd fled, she didn't feel like she was falling. She turned her face to the quilted sky above and let sleep take her again, the sound of the creek nearby and the steady presence of a man who hadn't asked her to be anything but free. Morning came slow and pale. Mist hovered low over the grass, clinging to the earth like breath held too long. Winona stirred beneath the blanket, her limbs stiff, her hair tangled from sleep. The fire had burned down to ash, though a few coals still glowed red in the belly of the stones. She sat up, the chill brushing her skin, and looked across the space between their bedrolls. Harlan was already on his feet, rolling up his things in practiced folds. His coat was buttoned, his hat pulled low, steam curling from a battered tin cup in his hand. He didn't greet her with words, only offered the cup as she stood and crossed to him. She took it with both hands, warmed her fingers against the metal. He watched the sky. "I heard a train last night," she said, sipping carefully. "Far off. Tracks run south of here. Freight mostly. Cattle, wheat. Passengers if they've got money. They'll think I took it," she said. "My father, James. They'll say I ran east." "You didn't," Harlan said. "You rode west." The way he said it, quiet and certain, settled something in her chest she hadn't known was loose. She looked down at the cup. "I don't have much with me. Just what was sewn into the hem of my shift." "That's yours," he said. "And enough." They packed their things without rush. Harlan saddled the horse, checked the cinch, then offered her the stirrup. She climbed up without needing his hand this time, and he mounted behind her. They rode along the creek for an hour before the land opened into rust-colored hills. A hawk turned overhead, its shadow fleeting across the grass. The road narrowed where it cut through a draw, and Harlan pulled the horse to a stop near a cluster of granite boulders. "Smoke," he said, pointing with his chin. Winona leaned forward. A faint gray column rose in the distance, too thin for prairie fire, too steady for anything wild. Harlan dismounted, handed her the reins. "Stay here," he said. "I'll look. I'm not staying behind." He met her eyes, saw the way her spine stiffened in the saddle. Then he nodded once. "All right, then." They led the horse off the trail, keeping low as they moved around a ridge. The smoke came from a camp tucked in a dry gully. 3 men, all unshaven and lean, sat around a cookpot. Their horses were picketed nearby, rifles resting against saddles. Winona crouched beside him behind a juniper scrub. "Do you know them?" "No," Harlan said. "But 2 of them have been on the trail a long while. Look at their boots, dust caked thick. That 3rd one's cleaner, newer gear. Might be from town. Could be looking for me?" "Could be," he said. "Or just headed north. But we won't wait to find out." They turned back the way they came and rode a wide arc west, keeping the ridge between them and the camp. When the trail reappeared, Winona looked over her shoulder. Nothing followed. They didn't speak again until midday, when the sun was strong overhead and the sage crushed underfoot gave off its sharp scent. Harlan stopped near a dry wash, dismounted, and led the horse to drink from a shallow pool. Winona sat on a flat rock, pulling her hair back with a strip of leather she found in her pocket. "You never asked what I want," she said. Harlan looked up, wiping his hands on his trousers. "What do you want?" "I want land," she said. "A place to plant things. A house that doesn't echo when you speak. Somewhere no one decides for me." He nodded once, as if that made perfect sense. "You know how to farm?" "My uncle ranched near Powder River. I helped him summers. He taught me fence posts, seed spacing, how to pull calves when they come wrong." Harlan's eyes held steady on hers. "Then you're halfway there." She stood, walked to where he stood near the horse. "Why are you going west?" He took a breath before answering. "Because I'm tired of not belonging. Figured if I kept moving, maybe I'd find a piece of land no one else had claimed to. Not just on paper. In the heart." Winona looked out across the hills, the horizon wide and open. "That sounds like something worth finding." They rode again until the land sloped into a narrow valley filled with cottonwoods and low shrubs. A stream cut through the middle, clear and winding. They followed it until the sun dropped low, then stopped beneath a stand of aspen. Harlan built the fire. Winona gathered pine cones and dry grass. They cooked beans in his tin pot, shared a single biscuit she'd saved in her pocket. After, he carved at a block of wood with his knife while she stitched a tear in her sleeve. "You ever think about staying in one place again?" she asked. He didn't look up. "Sometimes. But I never had the right reason." She nodded, brushing thread through the fabric. "What if you found one?" He looked at her then. The knife paused in his hand. "I'd stop moving." The wind picked up, rustling the leaves above their heads. She didn't speak again that night, but when she lay down, she chose the bedroll closer to his. just a little closer. And he didn't move away. The third morning began with frost on the mule's reins and a hush in the trees that hadn't been there the night before. Winona brushed her fingers along the grass, where ice had laced the tips like spun glass. Harlan handed her a strip of jerky without a word, and she nodded in thanks. They ate standing, watching the sun rise behind the ridge. The earth was waking slow, and they let it. Neither of them was in a hurry. By early afternoon they came across a trail split, marked with a weather-worn post that leaned left as if tired of standing. Harlan traced the carving with his gloved thumb. "South leads toward Tensleep," he said. "Northwest'll take us past the Bighorn foothills." Less traveled, but rougher going. Winona stepped beside him. "What's west of the foothills?" He glanced toward the mountains. "There's a homestead out there. Belonged to a man named Leafson. Served with my father during the war. He passed last winter, but his daughter stayed on. Could be she needs hands." Winona adjusted the strap across her shoulder, her voice quiet but firm. "Let's try it." They turned the horse northwest. The trail narrowed, climbing across gullies and shale. The air thinned, sharp with pine and the faint scent of snow tucked high in the peaks. They passed no one. That night, they made camp beside a dry creek. Winona strung her shawl between two trees and knelt beneath it, mending a loose hem. Harlan sat close enough to catch the firelight on his boots but not his face. For a while, the only sound was the scraping of his whetstone across his blade. "Did you ever think of going back?" she asked, watching the threads slip through fabric. "To Missouri? To who you were before?" He paused mid-stroke, then resumed. "No, there wasn't enough left to go back to." She tied off the stitch and set her needle aside. "I used to think I'd teach children, maybe. I knew all the books in the parish collection. But once my mother died, there was never time." He looked at her then, the fire catching the lines near his mouth. "You still could." "I don't think I want to," she said. "Not anymore. I want to learn something that makes sense with my hands. That stays done once it's done." He nodded. "Fences do that. So do gardens." A branch snapped somewhere in the brush and Harlan turned his head sharply, listening. But the wind carried no footsteps. Just a mule deer crashing through underbrush. They settled back into stillness. The stars came out slow, blinking one by one like lanterns lit in distant windows. Winona leaned back onto her elbows. "Do you miss her?" she asked, her voice nearly lost to the wind. Harlan's jaw shifted, but he didn't turn away. "Every day. But it doesn't hurt the same now. Grief's got a way of settling into the corners." She didn't press. Instead, she reached for a pine twig and broke it in her fingers, the scent rising sharp and clean. "I think I'm done being afraid of myself," she said. He looked at her for a long moment. "That's a good thing to be done with." They turned in soon after, neither saying goodnight, but the quiet between them had softened. She slept deeper than the night before, dreamless and still. By midday the next day, they crested a rise and saw a house in the valley below. It was small, rough-timbered with a sod roof shored by stone. A thin trail of smoke lifted from the chimney. A barn crouched nearby, missing half its roof. Chickens scratched the dirt beside a sun-bleached wagon. Harlan slowed the horse. "That's it." Winona studied the land. The fields were overgrown, the fences sagging, but the soil looked dark and deep. The valley caught the sun just right. Felt like a place that could hold something. They rode down slow. A woman stepped out from the porch, rifle cradled loose in her arms. Her dress was patched, her eyes sharp. She didn't raise the barrel. Harlan tipped his hat. "We're looking for work, Miss Leafson." The woman looked at Winona, then back at him. "I could use another pair of hands," she said. "And there's a spare room with a stove. You'll muck stalls and patch roofline. You'll both earn your keep." "We'll work hard," Winona said. The woman nodded once and disappeared back inside. They tied the horse beneath the eaves and unloaded their bags. The room was plain. One narrow cot, a window with no glass, and a stove with rust along the legs. A washtub leaned against the far wall. Winona set her things down and turned to Harlan. "You'll sleep in the barn, won't you?" He nodded. "Every night I need to." She stepped close, her voice low. "I'm not running anymore. Not from this. Not from you." He didn't kiss her. Not yet. But his eyes held hers like he meant to stay. And she knew he would. They stepped back outside together, into the light of a land waiting to be worked. The weeks passed in the rhythm of work. Harlan patched the barn roof with rough-cut boards, while Winona cleared the yard of brambles that had choked the fence line. Each evening, they washed the dirt from their hands in the basin behind the house, and when the sun dipped past the ridge, they sat on the stoop side by side, saying little. The silence between them had grown full, not empty. Miss Leafson, who insisted on being called Alma, kept her distance at first, but it didn't take long for her to start leaving extra bread on the table or pointing out where the pasture grew richest clover. She never asked where Winona came from. She never asked why a man like Harlan had taken to hauling stones for a woman who wasn't his wife. She just watched. One night, as Harlan stoked the woodpile behind the barn, Alma stood beside Winona at the well. Her sleeves were rolled and her hands stained from dyeing wool. "He's quieter than most," Alma said, drawing up the bucket. Winona nodded. "But he doesn't leave." Alma tipped the bucket toward the trough. "That matters." By midsummer, the valley had softened. The wind came warmer, threading through the tall grass with the sound of river light. Winona planted squash and beans in long rows behind the house. Harlan built a gate for the goat pen, hammering the hinges from scrap iron. They worked in tandem now without need for words. The land responded. One afternoon, while pulling weeds near the south fence, Winona found the corner post split through. She straightened up, brushing dirt from her hands, and called out to Harlan, who was stacking hay near the barn. She pointed to the break. "That's not from weather." He examined the post, fingers following the fresh, splintered edge. "It's been kicked. Hard. Wild horses." He shook his head. "No tracks. Looks deliberate." A flicker of something passed between them. Not fear exactly, just a knowing. That night, Harlan sat outside longer than usual, rifle across his knees. Winona joined him quietly, a wool blanket around her shoulders. "Someone looking for me?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. Could be. Or they saw two strangers settle in and figured there's something worth taking. "I can stay watch," she offered. His gaze met hers. "We'll take turns." Nothing came that night, nor the next. But they fixed the fence, stronger this time, and Harlan rode the ridge every third day, watching the trail. Winona never asked what he saw, but he always returned before sundown. Late in August, Alma brought them to the edge of the pasture and showed them where the soil dipped low and dark. "My father meant to put a house here," she said. "But his heart gave out before he could. If you want it, it's yours." Winona blinked. "We can't take your land." Alma gave a dry laugh. "I've no kin and I won't farm it alone. You two aren't like most that pass through here. You stay. You build. That's worth more than money." Harlan looked to Winona, then back to Alma. "We'll work it. And we'll make it better." The next morning, Winona walked the plot alone. The sun hadn't cracked the sky yet, and mist clung close to the grass. She stood in the middle of the field, eyes closed, breathing in the scent of damp earth. When she opened them, Harlan was there, just behind her. He cleared his throat. "I've been thinking on something." She turned, brushing hair from her face. "What is it?" "I want to stay here," he said. "Not just the land. You." She stared at him, the morning light catching the lines around his eyes. Her voice came soft. "I want that too." He stepped closer, reaching for her hand. "I haven't said it before. Not out loud. But it's been growing in me, quiet and sure. I love you, Winona. I think I have since the moment you ran." She smiled, slow and certain. "I've never belonged anywhere. Not until now. Not until you." He kissed her then, the wind folding around them like a second breath. And when she pressed her forehead to his, she whispered, "Let's build the house together." They did. Through autumn, they laid stone for the foundation, hauled timber from the pines beyond the ridge. Winona painted the shutters blue. Harlan carved her name into a beam above the doorway. Alma watched from her porch, arms crossed, a faint grin playing at her mouth. By the first snowfall, they'd moved in. The walls were still bare, but the stove worked and the roof held. On the mantel sat a carved box Harlan had whittled from cottonwood. It held seeds for spring. They married in the kitchen, Alma reading from her father's worn Bible. No guests, no rings, just hands clasped and a promise shared between two who had already chosen each other long ago. Years passed. The pasture grew thick with grass, the barn filled with the low sounds of goats and hens. Winona taught two neighbor children their letters at the table each morning. Harlan traded fence wire and honey in town. They slept close each night, her head tucked beneath his jaw, his arm wrapped around her like earth around roots. They never spoke of the church or Missouri or the broken fence post again. Those things had passed like old weather. What remained was the home they built with their own hands, the love they never had to name to know, and the quiet, enduring joy of two souls who had found rest in each other. And they never left.